How does your product use or challenge conventions, and how does it represent social groups or issues?
This year, I decided to go for the magazine, previously having gone for the short film intro. And not only was this relatively more feasible for me to achieve, but it also allowed me to explore a media text that I had never ever touched before, that being magazines. This was my first time working with such a thing, and so as expected, there were many roadblocks in terms of ideas that I had to conquer in the beginning. I decided to go for the music genre out of the choice of travel and music, believing in my experience in the field of music to give me a boost in my project. Me having little to no prior knowledge regarding magazines, magazine aesthetic, and magazines in general, I had to do extensive research on the codes and conventions found in not only a music magazine but just in a magazine in general. Though after all the hard work, I can confidently say that the convergence of all the conventions throughout all three parts of my magazine came out surprisingly remarkable. In terms of representation of a social group, instead of groups or like just a singular group that are separated by something that is not under their control, for example, age or gender. My product is more focused towards the groups that are called so due to their called so just like due to their common preferences. In this case, rock music. Though rock music can popularly be affiliated with the youth when seen from a general person's perspective, at the end of the day, it is music, and music, no matter what genre, can catch the appeal of all, regardless of their age or gender. Another misconception with rock music and youth is that with the progressing times, as one of the few devout lovers of rock music in my own age group, it has been quite easy to notice that youth nowadays has little to no interest in rock music or anything related to rock music, for example, metal music or death metal or whatever. When people refer to the relationship between youth and rock, they are often referring to the youth of nearly a decade ago. In times between, for example, 1970s to I believe the 2000s is when the rock genre was popular amongst the youth. Instead, a more accurate relationship would be, and ironically, would be with the people themselves, not just the youth, the people who are part of the rock community, for example. My magazine, E Major, the name, is constructed with this fact in mind in such a way that it assumes and targets audiences that are familiar with the genre. As for the conventions, this being my first time dealing with magazines, regardless if I'm comfortable with the genre, I depended on the codes and conventions I studied heavily. This was not only because of my amateurity dealing with magazines, but also because I wanted a product that could be considered good enough to count as an actual magazine. Though later I found out that I was already familiar with many of the conventions that I studied. There were many that caught me, however, there were still many that caught me by surprise. As expected, most of these were not even related to the concept of rock, but instead to the concept of a magazine, or like the general aesthetic or the design of a magazine in general. For example, the contrast between the colors and not just the regular color theme of the magazine, but also the pop out colors or how to incorporate them. For example, things like these were like the major learning outcomes of my foundation portfolio.